Recording in progress. Hello, everyone. If you guys could graciously take a seat at this point, we're about to start the program. And virtually for all those on Zoom, please take a seat as well, make yourself comfortable. And I'm so thrilled to have all of you here today. It has been an ultimate pleasure working with everyone to make this happen. This has been a dream for many, many, many people over the last few months. And so I'm going to start with a few thank yous. First, I'd like to thank Steve Polansky. This was your brainchild, and you came up with this wonderful idea, and we implemented it together with Talia Berger. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone at KOH. I saw Joanne setting up tables today. I saw Dwight, who's running one of the computers. I'd like to thank Cody, who's our AV specialist. And I'd like to thank all the staff at Mosaic Law and the security guard. And I'd like to thank the KOH for the use, pardon me. I'd like to thank the KOH for the use of the Michael Hayward camera. And of course, Kashi. Everyone at the KOH has been wonderful. It's so wonderful to see you here. Hi. And KOH Library and Cultural Center was founded some years ago, and it's been a couple years since we've had an in-person program at KOH. And now we've reached the 21st century. And as my friend Cantor Jeremy Burko says in Toronto, we have revolutionized what we are doing for synagogues these days. It has become not only a place that we daven in person, but there is a virtual element in the 21st century in producing educational and entertainment and religious entities online and in person in hybrid. And so today is the culmination of a lot of 2 years of work, being able to have a hybrid. Now let me tell you a little bit about today and a little bit of what's to come. Today, we will be starting with Rabbi Herman, who will be talking about the process of when he meets with a person or people before a funeral to provide comfort and to be able to create the eulogy and all those elements. And we'll have a chance to get to know him as a pastoral caregiver. He will be joining us in July, and I've been talking with him for the last few months, and I've known him for many years. What a wonderful addition to our community. Following that, we will have a presentation on the Sacramento funeral homes. We have 2 funeral homes in Sacramento, and one of them will be presenting today, and the Chevra Kadisha, and this will include David Varshawsky, Carla Porter, Judy Lawson, Linda Reitzenstein, Edna Stewart. And then following that, from Home of Peace, we welcome Lou Rosenberg, our executive director of Home of Peace Cemetery. Then talking about liturgy and Shiva Shloshim, liturgy of funerals, Shiva Shloshim and 11 months and yard site. It will be Rabbi Taff and I. Following that, we will have a question and answer moderated by Stephen Polansky. So I recommend that everyone send online your questions by text. Just send a direct message to Steve. And in the future, we will have 2 more sessions, 7 p.m. on Mondays. Monday, May 2nd, we will have discussions about previous to end of life. So Rabbi Moses will be talking about the Gosas and the end of life from Talmud. Rabbi Herman will be talking about vidui and organ donation. Dr. Mark Bloom will talk about hospice care. And there will be another Q&A moderated by Stephen Polansky. By the way, for those that are on Zoom, you should come in person if you can. There's some wonderful refreshments put on by KOH. And on Monday, May 9th, we will be welcoming and talking about wills and estates with David Long in long-term care, Carol Herman, care in facilities and where to go for different levels of facilities, services available to elderly, and pitfalls of care situations. Mitchell Oswald will be talking about wills and estates. And Mitchell Oswald, we thank him as well, and the Hayward family and Hi Kastenberg. The KOH is made up with Kastenberg, Ostwald, and Hayward. Following Ostwald. My apologies. Michael Ellison from JCFW, Karen Rubin, and Steve Polansky, Life and Legacy Program. And then, of course, we'll have questions and answers. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to connect online. There are people joining here from across the country and also in person. And this is the culmination of the best of what Mosaic Law Congregation has to offer today. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for being here virtually or in person. And I would like to invite Rabbi Herman virtually up to the screen.
Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay. It's a pleasure to be able to see some of you. And I just wanted to say this is my second program with KOH. I did a program with the young families. And I'm looking forward to teaching a little this evening. I see these programs as going in reverse order. First, we're dealing with, God forbid, the loss of a loved one and how to handle that. Then next week, someone who is terminally ill and in the process of dying and how to handle that, which is a different pastoral approach. And the third week, what we can do, and that's what I was trying to allude to in the video. There's not going to be a session per se on ethical will, but what we can do in terms of our legacy and how we can leave a strong foundation for generations to come. Before I meet with the family, I was asked to talk about the concept of aninut. When one loses one of their 7 closest relatives, a father, a mother, God forbid, a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, or a spouse, one is considered onain. It's a word in Hebrew that means deep sorrow. And during this time, one is exempt from doing mitzvot. One does not do commandments. And even though one is exempt, traditionally one could do it, but the rabbis understand it as a term called patur aval asur. They're exempt, but they're really forbidden. They shouldn't be doing commandments, which includes things like studying Torah, eating meat and drinking wine, things which gladden the heart, that bring joy, saying blessings before eating any food, wearing tefillin, going to prayer services at all. The one thing that is required is Shabbat observance. And I mean, keep it kosher, I'll add in there too. But why is this the case? This is the case for 2 reasons. One, being preoccupied with the burial. It used to be that family members served as their own Chevra Kadisha. They took care of the burial arrangements, and they were their own shomrim also. They never left the body between death and burial. But even though that's no longer the case, we still have this category out of respect for the deceased and recognizing the shock that has befallen someone. Even if one had a loved one who was ill for years, it leaves a void when that person's physical presence leaves the earth. And we don't want them to have to put on a face and pretend everything is normal. That'll be more covered in the Shiva section, I'm sure. So this individual is not supposed to be focused on commandments, only on funeral and burial arrangements. And I like to teach with stories. So I'll tell a different story next week, but I'll tell a quick story before I talk about meeting with the family. I had a congregant who lost his mother, and he came to Minyan between the loss and the funeral. He was an onain. And I think his mechutim, his in-law, was the one who said to him, "You shouldn't be here, leave." And I said, afterwards I pulled him aside, I said, you're technically correct, but there's a principle of kavod habriot, of honoring people. And so while an onen should not be going to Minyan, if an onen shows up, I'm not going to kick them out of the service, because maybe at that very moment, they need comfort. They need a connection, a spiritual connection. And that's where I'm going with what I do when I meet with the family. I always start with something like this. Grief comes at different times, in different ways to different people. Sometimes we'll laugh at a memory of our loved one, a joyous experience. Other times we'll just cry out of nowhere. We might even not even know why we're crying. Or we'll feel our heart breaking down. And however grief comes to us, the feelings of loss, we need to honor those feelings. We need to honor those emotions. And that's why this process is more about the mourners than it is about anyone else. I'm not going to get into Shiva, don't worry. I'll leave that for Rabbi Taff and Cantor Rosner. But I know people who go crazy thinking to themselves, I need to have enough food for people to eat. That is not the job of a mourner. The job of a mourner is to be comforted. So much so that if you go to a traditional mourner's Shiva house, you say nothing unless you are addressed. You are just physically present. So when I meet with a family, I want to make sure that the things that will be discussed today are taken care of first, that there are burial plots arranged. I talk to families and I recommend, neither is required, but I strongly recommend, well, you'll be hearing about a little later, the Tahara process with the Chevra Kadisha, having someone in their final burial clothing and be prepared with dignity and with honor. I also recommend a shomer, someone who watches the body from the time of death until the funeral. And of course, we try to do this as soon as possible. I only know of one case where someone died early in the morning and the funeral was the same day. Generally, it's at least one day later. But we try, for the family's sake, I would say more so than anyone else's, to do the burial as soon as possible. And of course, I would check on the type of service, whether it's a chapel service followed by graveside only, whether it's a mausoleum, whether it's another type of service. But I would get the logistics in advance. And I schedule a time to meet with the family, ideally in person. If not possible, then over the phone or over Zoom, or with whoever I can do in person. And in addition to discussing the service, which you'll hear about later, and the Shiva process, which you'll hear about later, and attending Minyan, I ask a certain types of questions. I try to let families guide how they want to share about their loved one. But there are questions that I ask, and it depends on the situation. But typical questions are adjectives to describe them, him or her, what he or she valued in life, what Judaism meant to him or her. One of the hard ones, what will you miss most about him or her? What are some of the experiences that you shared together that you remember? And I always assure the family, if I didn't know the person, that I speak last in those situations, because I'm not going to take material from anyone. I'm going to make sure anyone who wants to give a eulogy in the immediate family and whoever they designate, to know that in advance, and to have that taken care of. And I might ask biographical information, but that's stuff that I can get from an obituary. And that's not what I center my eulogy on. It's more thematic. Who someone was, what the legacy and the values are that they're leaving us. And also the Jewish connection, which does not need to be a religious connection. There are many different types of Jewish connections. So without taking much more time, I just wanted to say a couple other things I discussed with the family. I discussed whether or not they would like pallbearers. I discuss donations, if they have a place where they would like, or multiple places where loved ones to give donations. Of course, I will suggest Mosaic Law Congregation, but there might be other sources. Someone might have passed away from cancer and have a foundation there. Someone might like working with animals and have an animal rescue source, and others as well. So the last thing that I will say for right now is you'll be getting a lot of information in these 3 sessions. And the most important thing is not remembering all the rules and regulations. The most important thing is understanding that the goal of Jewish ritual and the goal of Rabbi, as I see it, in these times, is to be there for people and however they are needed. Some people might not want to do a Shiva, and that's okay. Now we have a hybrid approach where some do it via Zoom. Some have people only in their house. Some do various approaches. I've had people who told me, we're not going to use dirt, we're going to use flowers. That's what works for them. My job as the rabbi is to, yes, when it is called for, to talk about traditional practices and to let people know. Whether one of them is burial of books, because we're the people of the book, books which have fallen into disuse, and is to be an expert in these different areas. But in this moment, is to be a pastor. It's to be someone who is able to sense what the family needs, which is different things for different people, and to be able to respond to it as best as I can. So I'm going to leave things there. And while I'll be signing off this evening, my intention is to stay on all of next class. I speak toward the end of next class. And then if there are questions, I put my email in the chat. For those in person, it's ben.d.herman@gmail.com. Ben.david, D for David, .herman@gmail.com. And I look forward to getting to meet you in person in a couple months. Thank you.
My right is David Varshawsky. Then we have Carla Porter, and we have Linda Reitzenstein. And we also have up there, if you guys can highlight Judy Lawson, if she's here. And later we'll highlight Edna, and we'll introduce her as well. So David, would you like to introduce yourself for just a second? Just take that mic and hold it up to your mouth.
Good evening, everybody. I'm David Varshawsky. I am currently the president of the Chevra Kadisha. I've been a member of the Chevra Kadisha, myself, Linda, and our friend sitting in the front seat there for almost 30 years. We are here today to kind of put our heads together and see what it takes to put on and have a successful funeral that can be done in a short period of time. When we started approximately 25 years ago, the family that ran the Chevra Kadisha had pretty much their own way of wanting to do something. And monies were collected, and they used the monies in their mindset that if there would ever be a riot of some sort, it would be done with the monies that's collected. They always felt that the prisoners at Folsom Prison, if they died, no one would take care of them. So this is where dollars went to them. When the family passed away, Linda, myself, my good friend over there sitting there, were called over by, bear with me, it was the Women's Roche, and were set up to do the new Chevra Kadisha. And at that time, I was invited by Bill Berkman to join the men's part. I had never been involved with anything of this nature before, but it became something that became a very hard situation for me and my family. And we took part, and here we are, give or take, the years that have passed. We will hear a little more from Linda as well, but the times that have come have been very difficult in making the Chevra Kadisha work in Sacramento, California. When the men's department or men's took part in trying to do a Tahara 25, 30 years ago, we did not get good cooperation from the city of Sacramento in being able to put the program together. It's with Rabbi Taff at the time coming in, myself going to the head of the funeral directors of Sacramento, that we pleaded our case, and things became a little bit better as far as being easy for having a Jewish funeral at a very delicate time that we needed to. So here we are, this many years on, and we're here together to gather what we can do to improve the Chevra Kadisha in their outings and what they do. In the meantime, while I was going through the beginning of our phase, Lynn Brothers was run by a man named Vern Lynn, who respected the Jewish people wholeheartedly and respected their doings. And Vern always corrected themselves and did the right thing for us. The problem came in is when Vern finally decided to sell. He sold his company to a young group that had no idea of any ethics of taking care of anything. And on that basis, they failed. And on that basis, we received another mortuary in town that was willing to help the Jewish people, and that was Lombard's.
What I really appreciate now is that we have two different mortuaries that we work with, because Lynn Brothers is back and has been doing some really amazing things. And Lombard has been a pleasure to work with as well. And it's a very interesting segue. So we have options, and we have quite a big Jewish population here. So it's important that we have two wonderful mortuaries to serve us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Carla, We'll be getting to your presentation a little bit later, but if you could give a short introduction of who you are, where you are from, just so we can get to know you on a personal level as well. Just for a short a moment, and same with Linda. So before you present your presentation, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Carla Porter. I'm the general manager at Lynn Brothers Funeral Home.
Carla.
I'm the general manager at Lynn Brothers Funeral Home. I've been there for 15 years. I've been in the funeral industry for 22, and I've really enjoyed working with all the Jewish community. And I'm going to give my presentation a little later. Thank you.
Where are you from, by the way?
I was born in the Bay Area, but have lived in Sacramento most of my life.
Most of your life. Oh, that's great. And Linda, tell us a little bit about where you're from and who you are, and also feel free to mention that we've been working together with you as Gabbai Rishon, but where you're born and how we've connected and your journey to Sacramento.
My name is Linda Reitzenstein. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Beautiful.
My name is Linda Reitzenstein. I came to Sacramento. Originally, I'm from New York, as you can probably tell. I lived in Los Angeles for 14 years, and I came to Sacramento in 1991. And somewhere between 1991 and 1995, I was recruited to become part of the Chevra Kadisha and to perform Tahara. The people that the couple that recruited me were Jan and Bill Berkman. And honestly, I hesitated at first because I realized that this was a very, very delicate process. I didn't know if I had the courage to do it. And after being asked a couple of times, I got a call, and I was asked to just come and do the reading before and the reading after we performed the Tahara. And when I got there, I want you to know I had 2 days to agonize over this. And when I got there, I realized what this was about. And I thought to myself, I can do this. And since then, I've been a member for 27 years. And I try to, be present at as many Taharas as I possibly can. It is a very spiritual experience. And as much as it, if you know the deceased, it becomes a more special experience. But every time we do it, it's a different person, it's a different experience. And as I said, it's very spiritual. Yes?
Linda, can you explain what the
Excuse me, Linda, questions at the end of the session.
Just that you keep saying Tahara, and I think people don't know.
We'll get there. It's part of the presentation. Tahara is part of the process of cleaning and preparing, but we'll talk in great detail about that. But before we get to the Tahara and we get to the Chevra Kadisha, I want to ask our panelists, if you can get your microphones ready, what are some of the requirements of a Jewish funeral? And I'll supplement as well. So what makes a Jewish funeral happen as Jewish as opposed to maybe not Jewish?
You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Carla,
Well,
David.
as you said before, when a person dies, the goof, the body, or the mate, the deceased, should be buried as soon as possible. I know that in Israel, they very frequently bury the same day. They bury at night even. Unfortunately, we cannot always adhere to that because we live in a city where people come from out of town and we need to wait for people. Sometimes there are extenuating circumstances, which I won't go into, but it delays the process. We generally perform a tahara, which is basically washing the body and dressing the body in shrouds. the night before the funeral or the morning of the funeral. What else would you like me to say?
Going to what I mentioned before, before, is that as quick as this duty done, it has to be ordained by the city or the county of Sacramento. And I think, Carla, you can explain what it takes before we have any kind of service of this nature, what has to be done from the family to the funeral parlor itself. Carla, please.
That will actually be mentioned in Carla's presentation, but we want to talk specifically about the Jewish element of the funeral in this question. So we have the bodies should not be mixed with others as part of the Jewish process. No embalming. Cremation is highly discouraged. And of course we have the Chevra Kadisha. And Carla also will be talking about the requirements for a casket being totally wooden with no metal rivets. And now I think, thank you for the introduction to Carla, by the way, David. I think we're ready for Carla's presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to kind of go over what happens when somebody passes away in the order that it happens. When a death occurs at a residence, if the person is under hospice, you have to call the hospice. After the hospice pronounces the death, then you can call the funeral home and we will come to the home. If the person is not under hospice and dies at home, you have to call 911. The medics will come out. They'll either release the body so you can call the funeral home, or if it's a sudden or unusual death, they may take the body to the coroner. And then you would have to contact the funeral home, of course, and tell them that the body is at the coroner. If a death occurs at an assisted living facility, please let the facility know in advance the funeral home that you've chosen, and they will call us at the time of death. When a death occurs at a medical center, remember the funeral home must have a release form. And can we show that form?
Oh yeah. Hey Cody, can you switch over to the other screen with the that we scanned just beforehand?
It says release at the top of the form.
Yeah, it was one of the two PDFs. There we go.
Okay. So this is the form that we have to take with us to the hospital, otherwise the hospital will not release the body to us. After you call the funeral home, please let us know if you are going to be having a shomer so we can make sure the funeral home is accessible to the people coming.
Would you, be, at this point, since we mentioned the shomer, or the shomrim, could I ask, including Carla, all the panelists, to talk a little bit on what shomrim is?
Well, I know it's a person who comes and sits with the body. Person who comes and sits with the body, and they're usually rotated every 4 to 8 hours.
And it's been a really, really wonderful process. Alyssa, my wife, has done this, and I've talked with many people. Sometimes people will bring Tehillim or Psalms as a means of honoring the person who is there, and also sometimes they'll bring things to study, the Parshat HaShavua, and in some cases for people that were less inclined to study Jewish texts, sometimes they'll come and they'll just read something that's enriching. And this practice was instituted when there were a lot more, it sounds a little crass, but there were a lot more rodents around, and so to protect the body from rodents or raiders or any sort of harm. And it's an act of compassion to be able to protect our loved ones. Sorry for that little detour, but
thank you for that.
thank you so much.
After learning about the death, the funeral home will start the process of obtaining the burial or transfer permit. A transfer permit is if the body is either being shipped out of the state or out of the country. We need to know as soon as possible the name of the doctor who will be signing the death certificate. The process of obtaining the burial or transit permit is obtaining the vital statistics information from the family, and I'll talk about that a little more later. Getting the cause of death from the doctor. After that, the cause of death has to be approved by the county health department. After it's approved, the doctor needs to sign the death certificate. Then the coroner approval and number on the death certificate if that's necessary. The completed death certificate is submitted to the county health department. The final death certificate must be approved by the county and the state. After that approval, the county health department issues the permit. The burial or transfer can now take place, and the certified copies of the death certificate can be ordered. This process can take a couple days, so that's why I said it's really important that you let the funeral home know right away who the doctor is so we can begin that process. It can be beneficial to make pre-arrangements with the funeral home before the death occurs. You can either pay for the services at the time, or you can come in and fill out all the necessary forms and then pay when the death occurs. If you do want to pay before the death occurs, we must have you meet with our pre-arrangement counselor. According to state law, the funds must be put into an insurance policy until the death occurs. The funeral home is not allowed to keep the funds. Now I'm just going to go over what happens at the funeral home when you come in for the appointment. We are required to give you a current general price list and casket price list. This is our general price list. We have a special package for our Jewish community. We will also give you a copy of the Consumer Guide to Funeral and Cemetery Purchases, which is issued by the Department of Consumer Affairs. We will then fill out the vital statistics form. Could we see that form, please?
Oh yeah, that's the other PDF.
Got it? Okay. So as you can see, this form has a lot of information on it. And like I said, it's sometimes helpful if you give this to us ahead of time so we have this information. We're asking the decedent's full name, birth date, place of birth, social security number, marital status, education, race, occupation, years in that occupation, current residence. Informant, that's usually the person who calls us about the death. Then we'll need the spouse's full name, including the maiden name, father's full name, father's place of birth, mother's name, including the maiden name, and the mother's place of birth. So that form is really important that we have that. Like I said, it helps to have it ahead of time. There are two other forms required by the Department of Consumer Affairs that need to be signed by the next of kin. One is the authorization to accept or decline embalming. The other is the disclosure of the pre-need funeral arrangement. That form is if you do have a pre-arrangement, the family needs to know and has to be given a copy of it. We'll then talk to you about the actual service. If we are shipping the body out, we must have the name of the receiving funeral home. If shipping out of the country, this could take up to 3 weeks. If the service is local, you will decide if you want a chapel service followed by graveside or graveside only. You'll pick out a casket, and I'll go over that form with you in a minute. Tell us how many death certificates you want and decide on the memorial folder. We'll need the Hebrew name of the deceased and a photo if you would like one on the folders. We'll arrange the tahara and coordinate with the cemetery the date and time of the funeral. So if we could switch back to our funeral brochure. So as you can see, we have a package price of $4,500. This includes basic services of funeral director and staff, transfer of the remains from the place of death to the funeral home, use of equipment and facilities and staff for the funeral ceremony, whether it be in the chapel, graveside, the refrigeration, which is required by the state of California, the funeral coach also includes yarmulkes, ribbons for the cry, and Shiva candles. And if you look, that price does not include the casket. We have several choices for the Jewish all-wood caskets, and they range in price from around $1,295 to up to about $4,000. There are additional fees. If you are doing the tahara, there's a $250 donation. The shomer, we do have a charge of $125 for the entire time the shomer is there. A burial permit is required from the county, that is $12, and the certified copies of the death certificate are now $24. They just went up in January. Memorial book package includes 100 service folders and a memorial book for signing in, and then there's also tax on the merchandise. So that's just about everything. I'm sure we'll have some questions for me. I'll be happy to answer them for you.
The questions will be saved for the end, and I just want to thank Carla and David for their presentations, and remind you that it's always been a pleasure working with you and also with Lombard, but I've really felt a strong connection when we've worked, and when Rabbi Taff was on a sabbatical a couple years ago, we had a situation come up, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but you helped me through this really nicely, and
Yeah.
so
Thank you, Cantor. We appreciate it. We love working with you guys too.
thanks. And so both Lombard and Linz have been spectacular to work with. We have a beautiful community with 2 mortuaries, and the prices are very similar. And I really love your presentation today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For
Thank
being
you for
here
having me.
and representing what, in general, it takes to have a Jewish funeral in Sacramento. With that, see if this slide transfer thing, there we go. This little doohickey isn't working so well, so bear with me. We're going to go to Chevra Kadisha, and Linda is going to be presenting, and Judy Lawson, who is part of the Chevra Kadisha as well, will be, may participate as needed. So if we could get her screen up there as well. So Linda, tell me, what is the Chevra Kadisha exactly?
Well, basically, it is the burial society. Chevra means the group, comes from the word chaver, which means friend or member, and Kadisha means holy, sanctified. What we do, basically, is wash the body so that it is purified, dress the body in shrouds, place the body into the casket, put some sand over the body before we close the casket, and then put the pall on top. However, I'm going to give you a more step-by-step procedure of what we do from beginning to end. When we come into the room where Tahara is performed, the body is covered. There is a sheet over the body so that you cannot see the body. We read a prayer which starts with the words Ana Elohei, HaChesed v'Harachamim, and I won't go through the whole thing. Then, after we finish the first prayer, we uncover the body. We have 1 pail of water. Each person takes a sponge. Now, we usually have 4 people to do 1 tahara. Sometimes we do it with 5. Unfortunately, sometimes we can't get 4, so we will do it with 3. We will do whatever we need to do to perform this mitzvah and to ensure a proper Jewish burial. Each person takes a sponge and washes the body from top to bottom. We roll the body over, we wash the back, we make sure that everything is clean and sanitary. We roll to the other side and clean the other side. And then on certain circumstances, we can cut the nails. We refrain from it in certain circumstances, like if there's nail polish and stuff like that. After the body is totally washed, we place the cover on again. It's a sheet or a blanket. And then we read the second prayer, Vizarakti Mayim Alechem. we pour water over the body. Then after that, we uncover the body again, and we take 3 pails of water, large pails of water, and we start to pour the water over the body in a continuous motion. So we don't stop after we do 1 pail. We do 3 pails, and as we're finishing one, we've already begun another. So this pouring process continues until we have finished all 3 buckets. Then at that time, we dry the body on both sides, make sure that the table is completely dried so that when the person is put in the tachrichim, they are totally dry. Then we dress the body in shrouds, which are called tachrichim. When we dress the body, there are pants and a blouse or a shirt, and then on top of it is the kittel. And when there are ties around the collar, there are ties on the sleeves, there's a belt that we tie. The ties are made in the shape of a shin for shaddai. So essentially what you do is you tie a bow, and then you take one of the bows and you tie it again, so you have actually 3 bows, which is the symbol of Shaddai, God. Then it's time to lift the body from the table, where the washing table, into the casket. Now we have a lift, and generally speaking, we ask the staff from the funeral home to come in and assist us with that. Just for safety purposes. Okay. The body is lifted onto the lift and into the casket. At that point, we take a package of sand from Israel, Holy Land, and pour it over the shrouds, the tachrichim. And we make sure that we put it in the eyes and over the body. Then we cover the body with the sheets so that there's nothing exposed. Oh, I forgot to say, we put a bonnet around the head, and we tie it just like we do with the other ties into a shin. We cover, once the body's in the casket, we cover it with the sheets, and then we put the cover on the casket. We close the casket. We put the lid on the casket. There is a Magen David that gets put on approximately on the heart of the decedent. And then we put a pall on top of the casket, and that's basically the end of the process. So I hope I explained that well in detail.
I want to thank Linda, by the way, for such a beautiful presentation as well. And I want to add one thing and then also make a compliment that's unrelated to this in addition to your wonderful presentation. Rabbi Ricky Lobel gave a wonderful sermon before Yizkor at Saturday services at the end of Passover, talking about Shir HaShirim and the act of compassion. Shir HaShirim is Jewish love poetry that is existing in our canon of Jewish literature through the Tanakh. And it's a metaphor for the love of God, but also is pure, just beautiful love poetry. And so during Tahara, some of the prayers that are said are from Shir HaShirim as an act of compassion and an act of dignity, and to remember the person with fondness and beauty. You had I just want to thank you also. Linda has been our Gabbai Rishon, and we've added some new features to our services. Her and I meet weekly, And in advance, she picks up to sometimes 15 people which volunteer and participate in services. And we put our heads together every week about future services and how we can make things smoother on the Bima. And so not only has it been a pleasure working with you today, but also in creating our services as we reopen to, you had a quick question or?
Well, not a question.
Oh, don't forget your mic.
Excuse me. Not a question, but what Linda explained was generally speaking for a woman, and the men do it almost the same way, except it is different as far as having a bonnet or things of that nature. So there's a definite difference in the way the men's take care of their tahara as compared to Linda, although it is very, very similar. Something I'd like to also add, the people that do the tahara are very dedicated, wonderful people. But in the past, we've had some situations where some people want to attend as a person that says, I did the tahara, that were not involved at all. And this can be sometimes a situation that we've run against that is not correct in as far as doing the proper tahara for our people.
It's so wonderful, the amount of compassion that goes into Tahara and the Chevra Kadisha. And as always, it's wonderful to work with all three of you and also Lombard and all the people involved. We have a beautiful opportunity in our community. Edna Stewart, if we can get her up there as well. By the way, Judy, do you raise your hand if you have anything to add, by the way. Judy is a big part of our Chevra Kadisha as well. Can we also add to the spotlight if Edna Stewart is still here? Edna moved from Berkeley and was part of the Chevra Kadisha and ran a program that her and I and possibly Rabbi Herman will be talking about called a Death Cafe, which is a way that we can talk about death in a very, very non-judgmental way with some food and to learn in a similar type of way with a different forum from what we're doing tonight, just to learn and to experience and to get rid of the taboo. Similar to the jokey name that we have, everything that we want to learn about the end of life, but we're afraid to ask. It was a forum for people to do that as well. And she also is connected nationally with the Gamliel Institute, which you could see, jewish-funerals.org. And it's a really good resource. And Edna is going to be someone that I think will be an amazing resource. Is Edna up there on the screen?
Yeah.
And
Can you hear me?
let's go to the next slide, by the way. Edna, can you introduce yourself a little bit and talk about your role as the head of the Sudat Havara?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. There's a little bit of an echo. I moved up here 4 years ago. I have been on the faculty of the Gamliel Institute, which is part of Kavod V'Nuchim, a national organization that deals with end-of-life rituals and everything that has to do with end of life, Jewish end of life. And one of the things that we do is work with funeral homes that are not specifically Jewish funeral homes to get good contracts and good relationships. But we also deal with the governments of a lot of small towns and villages to be able to get Jewish cemeteries maintained the way we think they should be. I am a retired registered nurse. I have a master's degree in program and policy development. I went to Columbia, and I'm pretty old right now, but I'm still kicking. And I joined Mosaic Law 3 years ago. And I think that's about it. Kavod V'Nuchim is a wonderful organization. Cantor Ben just put up part of our website, but I would encourage people that have an interest in this to use our website. It has tons of information and a lot of good stories and a lot of things that that you might find usual. Most of what I teach is in community education, which I've been doing for about 12 years now. I've done a gazillion taharot. So is there anything else, Ben, other than meal of condolence? You don't want that now, do you?
Sure, yeah. About 2 years ago, we took a pause on the meal of condolence due to the pandemic. And when we started to come out of the pandemic, we were left with the dilemma, who's going to be in charge of the meal of condolence? And so I heard recently that Edna is in charge of that now, which is spectacular. Edna, can you talk a little bit about what the meal of condolence is and what some of the requirements are?
Yes, I understand I have 2 minutes, but I don't have anything to time it, so you'll have to do it. The meal of condolence is just what it says. It's a meal that goes to the mourners as they return from the cemetery. Here is what it entails. Here's the way I do it when I am doing a meal of condolence. I always have a pitcher of water and a towel in front of the door, even though most people will wash their hands when they actually leave the cemetery. In case you didn't, that pitcher of water and towel is there. You don't say the baracha over washing the hands. It's really to wash the specter of death off your hands. Ritually, the foods that you serve are round to indicate the roundness of our life cycle, that life goes on even after a death. So we serve things like lentils, hard-boiled eggs, bagels, that's a good one because people often are hungry. And it's usually just the immediate family. What a meal of condolence is not is a Shiva visit or a party or a great banquet. Usually, like I said, it's just the immediate family. Now, I saw an interesting custom recently that I'd never seen before. One of our elderly members, who I'm very fond of, his wife died a couple of years ago, and we did the meal of condolence. We were waiting for him and his daughter and son-in-law when they got home. And he's a Shoah survivor. And he asked for a piece of paper, and he burned it in a little metal tray and till it was ashes. And then he dipped his hard-boiled egg in the ashes and ate it that way. And he said that that is the way they did it in Poland. I thought it had to do with the fact that both he and his late wife were both Shoah survivors, but he said, no, it had nothing to do with that. It was just the custom in his village in Poland. So as far as the meal of condolence goes, I'm not making this stuff up. In the Gemara, the sages taught us that there is a baraita that the meal after the burial would be brought to the house of the mourner in various ways. And now we go into how the Gamliel Institute got its name. The wealthy would bring a meal in baskets of silver and gold, and the poor would bring it in baskets of peeled willow branches. The poor were embarrassed, as everyone could see that they were poor. So the sages instituted that everyone should bring a meal in baskets of peeled willow, so due to honor of the poor. The sages taught a similar baraita. At first, they would serve wine in the house of the mourner during the first meal after the burial. The wealthy would do so in cups made of white glass, and the poor would serve wine in cups of colored glass. And the poor were embarrassed, and everyone would see that they were poor. So the sages instituted that all should serve drinks in the colored cups in honor of the poor. So the Gamliel Institute got its name because Rabbi Gamliel was the sage who instituted the use of tachrichim, or the very plain shrouds that we wear, because as a mate or meta, which is the body, was carried through the village, if it was elaborately dressed, people could see that it was wealthy. And if it was poorly dressed, you could see that it was poor, and the poor were embarrassed. So Rabban Gamliel instituted the use of tachrichim, basic linen or cotton garments that look the same regardless. There's a book called the Kitzar Shulchan Aruch. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of a watered down Shulchan Aruch. It's supposed to be a kind of a handbook for everyday life, so it's much smaller. And they talk a lot about the meal of condolence, and it's a mitzvah for his neighbors to send him food for his first meal after burial, which is called the meal of condolence. The meal should begin with eggs or lentils, for they shall be round and have no mouth, as the mourner has no mouth. After this course, he may eat all the foods, even meat. If the mourner does not wish to eat that day until nightfall, then he can eat his own food. If he doesn't eat all night, then the next day he is not entitled to a meal of condolence because he is not returning from the cemetery. A woman should not be provided with a condolence meal by men. Rather, women should prepare her with the meal. Okay, I told you this already. So that's where some of the, there basically is no halacha when it comes to end-of-life rituals, but we have minhag and we have customs. Most of them come from Talmud. Well, some of them come from Talmud. Some of them come from your village. And on our website, and also on some of the classes I give, we talk about what the mourning ritual is like in different communities. So are there any questions?
Well, we'll have a question and answer towards the end, so let's bank the questions for a little bit later. I want to give a strong thank you to Edna Stewart, who is a pleasure to get to know, and it's something wonderful that she has this wealth of information and this beautiful manner of teaching, and I love the idea of you teaching us classes and more participation in leading the potential of the Death Cafe. I would also like to thank all our participants, Judy Lawson, who is a regular attendee of Minyan, and one of the leaders of the Chevra Kadisha, and all the members of the Chevra Kadisha, and Linda, and Carla, and David. I'd like to do a quick switch over and invite Lou Rosenberg. Now, one thing about Lou Rosenberg and David is that they've been attending the Friday Night Live and the Shabbat and the Stars religiously, might I say, since I arrived, and it's something that I look forward to seeing them at those services, which are the second Friday of every month. So with that, thank you so much. Perhaps, David, you can come up here, and I'll move a little bit out of the way. Yeah, if you would like to, okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you could sit, in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to move over a little bit here. You can sit right here. Yeah. And Cody, my little pen for changing doesn't work, so I'm going to ask you to control the PowerPoint. So Lou, if you could give a brief introduction about yourself, just where you're from and how you ended up in Sacramento.
Okay, I'm Lou Rosenberg. I'm probably the only one who's been here my whole life. I'm a native, so that's about 82 years now. So I've been around here for a while, and I've done a lot of things. I ended up doing this particular job, kind of, I don't know if you'd say a whim, but I was traveling for a living, doing sales, and Jan Berkman had asked me to help her. So I joined her, and when Bill unfortunately was sick sometimes, I covered for them and helped her. And when she quit, the board said they needed somebody, so I thought, well, I'll try this. And they gave me a year to try it, and 20 years later, here I am. So I've been doing it for about 20 years now.
Thank you. Let's go to the next slide for cemetery history. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of Home of Peace, please?
Yeah, Home of Peace was founded in 1850 by a group of Jewish pioneers, led by a man named Moses Hyman. They kind of went along for a while, and then they purchased a small tract of land at 32nd and J Street, which is now a Safeway and Homes. And they had actually offered people, if they wanted to be moved from there, not far away. Well, let me get away. I got ahead of myself. They purchased that small tract of land in the early 1900s. And Home of Peace was chartered as a nonprofit at that time. They began to look for a larger property to fulfill our needs. And in 1924, both Mosaic Law and B'nai Israel joined together and purchased the current location that we have now. Excuse me. We have about 6.5 acres, and it includes our chapel, mausoleum, a home where our caretaker lives on the property. We have a board of directors, 12 people, 6 from each congregation, and they direct me on what they want me to do. So that's kind of how we operate. We have a really good crew right now. I think Rabbi Taff's aware of that, of a gentleman named Bill Mattos and his son Billy, who do the actual grave digging for us, and they're really excellent. A lot of people think you just go out and dig a hole in the ground and there it is. It's a lot more involved than that. It has to be sure it's in the right place and everything works right and it's done well. And they are excellent. I have to give them kudos for that. We do offer individual and double depth plots, also with sections designated for traditional halakha, interfaith families, burial of ashes, mausoleum crypts, and niches. So we are pretty much a full service cemetery, do everything that you need, and just try and take care of people.
I'm going to put up a map which you sent me today. If you want to talk about the different areas of the map for a second.
Yeah, let's see.
Here, I'll step back and...
Okay. Well, you can see where the chapel was. Actually, the front area up in here is the original area for the cemetery, right in there. And that really is pretty well all filled in. I think I only have 2 available plots in the whole front section.
We're talking here, not the Rose
Up
Garden.
here, here, there. The Rose Garden is the mixed area, or we bury cremations there. And that's outlined by a concrete liner and the road, so that's specified specifically for that purpose. And that's right where he's got that there. What we call the new area, which is probably the last 40 or 50, 40 years, is starting over there, going along all the way up and down, and then right in the middle, right there, that's the what we call the halakhic area or orthodox. And the reason those are orthodox is a normal grave is 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. Those graves are 3 feet by 10 feet so that they have 2 feet to walk on them, so they don't have to walk on the graves. The rest of that area is open and available, and the only thing that really separates the rest of it is whether you want a flat stone or an upright type stone. If you go, for example, in the Rose Garden, it has to be a flat stone. If you go along the side over there, which is the back side, That can be upright or whatever you like. If up to where that line is the Orthodox. Beyond that, you can go wherever. Anybody can go in there. And that's just regular area, upright or flat stones. We have about, at a guess, about 50 years worth of graves remaining to be sold at the current rate of death, roughly 50 years. So we can take pre-needs on those or whatever anybody likes. I recommend pre-need.
Can we switch to back to the PowerPoint and go to the one captured going to maps, please? Keep going. So we talked about that. And then I just want to mention something that was really cool on the website is that you can actually search for your grave of a loved one through the website. So before you come, and if you want to come on Rosh Hashanah or the yard site of your loved ones, well, before Rosh Hashanah or during times of Yizkor or times of memory, and you can't remember where that loved one is, you can go to the Home of Peace one. Let's go to the next slide, which is, would you mind talking a little bit about some of the costs that go in terms of burial?
Okay, you know, I don't know, I have price sheets over there. Anybody wants to get one? Yeah. I'm sorry, yes. We all have the same problem talking to the mic. Anyway, we have a breakdown on prices. B'nai Israel and Mosaic Law, because they are the owners of the cemetery, and when they originally set it up, they determined that if you joined the congregations, you would get a break on the price of a plot at the cemetery. So at that time, there wasn't any other congregations around. Since then, we've gotten, I don't know how many, all kinds of different congregations in the area. So now they've got a tiered price level. So it runs from a member being B'nai Israel or Mosaic Law to affiliate, which is any of the other synagogues, to non-members. And there is price breaks on that. So it's a three-tiered price. The board may end up changing that eventually. That's their decision, I don't know. But that runs throughout, whether you go to a crypt, a niche space, a regular burial, or whatever. So that's, you know, you can do any of those.
And so one of the things that we had talked about was reserving plots now so you can reserve the price, you know, as the prices go up in time. And we have here some price sheets. And one of the things that we want to prepare you for today is saving and everything you need to do to prepare for the passing of your loved one, whether it be a grandparent, a parent, or yourself, or a significant other. And so with these price sheets and the price sheets that are provided by Lind, which is very similar to Lombard, you can budget for your family in advance. Maybe put a savings account aside, one for the cost of end of life, and we'll talk about some hospice options next week, and one, of course, for the life and legacy of Mosaic Law. Just giving a pitch for the following week, the final week. And so you could see that what is sort of the general cost range total?
Well, for the plot, let's say for Mosaic Law and B'nai Israel, today it's $48.80. And if you add, there's accessory costs, opening and closing the grave, grave liner, lowering device, that type of thing. So if you add it all up, it's going to run you about $65.50. That price is going to go up, probably within the next month or so. Mm-hmm. So honestly, if anybody wants to get in on the old price, they can contact me. Even if they don't do it today, if they contact me and tell me they're interested, I will make an appointment. They can get the grave at this current price and save money. Also, they don't have to pay for it all at once. You can do a down payment and monthly payments, and we do not charge any interest. So, you know, we are a nonprofit, and we just do what we can to survive. As Edna was saying, we want to keep the place looking good. We don't want in 50 years when it's closed up, or not closed up, but when all the graves are gone, we don't want it to turn into a weed-filled lot. We want it to still look nice. So when you come to visit your loved ones, it's a nice place to go.
Oh, thank you. And lastly, if you could talk a little bit about the process of an unveiling.
Unveiling is basically monument company will put the stone in at the time it's due. When they want to do the unveiling, they will put a sheet over it a few days before that. The unveiling can be set up. You can do it all by yourself with the rabbis or whatever. I just ask that people call me and tell me when, so that we don't have an unveiling and a burial going on at the same time. And that way, if, let's say, next Sunday, somebody wants an unveiling at 11, and we have a burial coming up, we can schedule that for 12 or 1, so they don't conflict. I know Rabbi Taff, we had that many years ago by coincidence, there was a burial and a unveiling at the same time. Not good. They were too close together, and it was not a good thing. And the sprinklers are off. Yes. We do not like to get wet.
We've had that problem at Mosaic Law too,
Yes.
but we've thanks to recent advancements, we haven't had that problem recently.
No, we try and avoid that if we can. But unveilings are pretty much up to the family as they want to do them. You know, I just say, look, you told me the time, show up, do what you want to do. Some people want a few chairs set up, we'll do that. But overall, it's usually just, I think takes about 30 minutes usually, and whatever the family wants to do.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure working with
pleasure.
you and everyone. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Reuven Taff. Oh, I don't suppose we can hold the questions until after Rabbi Taff, but we will get to it. And if you want to let Steve know the question, he can pose it in about 15 minutes. Rabbi, come on down.
Everybody stand up and stretch for a moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Would you like to stand over here, or you just stand right here? Okay. Would you like a lapel mic, or would you like?
I have to be up there?
Yeah.
But then I have to look at the...
And Cody, can you switch over to the other PowerPoint? Oh, so you want to stand or sit?
Well, I'll sit now.
Oh, great. Rabbi Taff is our emeritus rabbi, and is the main reason why I ended up in Sacramento, because I just enjoyed the weekend so much with him when I first came out. And so Rabbi Taff has been an amazing colleague, amazing friend, and we're going to be talking about the liturgy of the Jewish funeral.
First of all, it's nice to be back at the KOH. And Yisher Kochech to you, Talia, and Yisher Koch to you, Steve, and to the Cantor, and to all the leaders of KOH for making this program possible. It's been a very long time, many, many years since we had a program like this one, and I think it is important to have these programs every few years or so to educate our community about the important issues of death and mourning.
Can I also just thank Jonathan Lightman, who has been, he took our raw PowerPoints and made them beautiful, so thank you so much.
Jonathan did a tremendous job with all the graphics of this particular PowerPoint. So I'm going to, I think, Cantor, you were going to begin, I think.
Well, yeah, we mentioned that traditionally a funeral is within 24 hours after death, and there are a couple different options at a cemetery, chapel, graveside, mortuary, or synagogue that we can do. And there's something called the Kriya, and this I'll tell you about. I introduced this when I fly solo, leading funerals, and of course Rabbi Taff or Rabbi Herman or Rabbi Moses or other rabbis that I've worked with have always introduced this. So basically, it's a ribbon that you put, in some cases, close to your heart on the left side, in some cases to the right. And according to Rabbi Maurice Lamb, the most striking Jewish expression of grief is the rending of garments of a mourner prior to the funeral service. The Bible records many instances of rending these clothes after the news of death. When Jacob saw Joseph's coat of many colors drenched in what he thought was his son's blood, he ripped his garments. Likewise, David tore his clothes when he heard of the death of King Saul. And Job, who knew grief so well, multiple times, stood up and rent his mantle. The rending is an opportunity for psychological relief. So these are the words of Rabbi Maurice Lamb in his book. In addition to what Rabbi Lamb says, the ripping of a garment or a ribbon, but sometimes clothing, is a metaphor for our emotions. In that time, you can mend a garment, you could sew it up, but there is still a mark left, no matter what, after it is stitched up. And the ribbon could be worn for 7 days, symbolizing the time of the Shiva. So how it really works is the rabbi or myself or someone else who's leading the funeral will go up to the person, hand them a little pin with a garment on it. Sometimes people have an old tie and they cut the tie. But and as the garment or ribbon is torn, the mourner says, "Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who rules the universe, who is the judge of truth." And the Cantor, the rabbi, recites together with the mourners, "Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehishem Adonai mevarach." Adonai has given and Adonai has taken. Praise be the name of the Lord Adonai. So as we start that is the beginning of a funeral service. Is it okay if I talk about inside?
I just wanted to add about the Kriya. The tradition is to actually cut your garment. And there are some families, I always offer the option, do you want to make the tear in your actual jacket or your blouse or your shirt? When my parents' funeral occurred in Israel, there were no black ribbons. That has become an American custom, these black mourning ribbons here in America. But in Israel, the first thing the rabbi did was he actually made the tear. But it is the custom for the mourner to actually make the tear. The rabbi might start the tear with a scissors or a razor, but I found that to be very interesting that the custom is, in Israel, they tear the garment. You don't see any mourning ribbons in Israel. But if you do tear the garment, the custom is to wear that rended garment for 7 days, except for Shabbat, because we're not allowed to exhibit any signs of mourning on the Sabbath. So for hygienic purposes, maybe the ribbon does make sense. On the other hand, I did change my shirt during Shiva for my father and mother at least 3 or 4 times, but made another cut or rend in the shirt that I put on. I just wanted to add that.
Oh, I'm so glad you did. And my concept for today was that Rabbi Taff and I would go back and forth. So that's the beginning part of a funeral service. And let's assume that we're in the chapel of Home of Peace or a chapel of any funeral home, depending on where you're at, not just Sacramento. But I will talk generally about what we do here in Sacramento because traditions vary from rabbi to rabbi and city to city and Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconformadox, Reconstructionist, all along the gamut. And so generally we start with chanting of a prayer from the Hebrew Bible. 3 things that I have done, well actually I'll just start with 2. Number 1 is Ecclesiastes is very fitting because there's a time to be born, time to die. This is a little less common, but often the psalm of choice for me is Psalm 121. Esarnai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri. And that's a really good, I lift my soul to the heavens to which, and the mountains to which my comfort comes. And that's for me the best way to start one. And I like using a congregational tune because people sing along and people feel included, and it brings people together. Often what happens after that is that family members will have the chance to give their personal eulogies or the personal accounts of their loved one. We try to have 1 to 3 at most, just to not burden all the people that are there. We've had more at times. And following that, the rabbi will give his full eulogy / Devar Torah. And following the Devar Torah, I or Rabbi Taff or Rabbi Herman or whoever I'm working with will sing El Male Rachamim. Now, El Male is similar to Kaddish. It's said for mourners, although it appears it's they have one for men, one for women, one for plural, and they also have an El Male for 6 million Jews or martyrs. So in Yom HaShoah we have a special liturgy. We have a special Yom HaShoah. We have a special liturgy for that as well, and it sounds a little bit like this. El Male Rachamim, Shoken Bamemromim.
O God exalted and who dwells on high.
Exactly. And so that just gives you a feel of how it is. It also is sung every Yizkor, so on Passover, on Yom Kippur, on Shavuot, and on Sukkot. And it's a way for us to memorialize. And come to Minions on Monday and Thursday at 8:30. We say El Male's for yard site then as well. At which point, would you like to add something about El Male?
I just wanted to, even before El Male, you mentioned eulogies, that there are family members, and I think Rabbi Herman mentioned that, are invited to give eulogies, and usually the rabbi is the last to speak. But I would just suggest that when family members do deliver a eulogy, that they try to coordinate with each other beforehand, so that there isn't a lot of repetition, and allow the family to do that. And I do agree with Rabbi Herman that the rabbi's goal is to essentially speak about the theme of the deceased life, his or her life, and capture the essence of that person rather than go into all the biographical information which the family usually gives. And also, I highly recommend that eulogies be written out by family members or friends who are designated to speak at the funeral, and that they be limited in time. Of course, the rabbi has no limit to his allotted time, but now I say that in jest. I mean, I think that, in order for a service to go smoothly at a funeral, I think that the words should be written out rather than people getting up and spontaneously speaking. Also, there has been a tradition in the past where the rabbi would ask people attending the service who wants to come up and say a few words. That can go on endlessly, and so we have frowned upon that. Although, on some occasions, if the attendance is a sparse attendance, we've allowed people to come up to say a few words.
Two situations about that. When one individual had passed away who had no family members, recently, it was about 3 months ago, we made the decision to invite people to come up and speak about her, and it was very telling because we all had a certain limited knowledge of her, and everyone brought a piece or an offering about her, and it painted this beautiful picture of her. We also have the chance, and Rabbi will talk about this a little bit later, we've established a tradition here that doesn't exist out east as much, of during the Shiva inviting people to talk. And so there's another opportunity. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Psalm 23. We want to fit it in. It's sort of a wild card. You can fit it anywhere in the ceremony. And I'm looking at David Varshawsky, who loves Psalm 23 and always reminds us to say, hey, don't forget to do Psalm 23. And
Let me also add about the El Maleh Rachamim Cantor, because in the Orthodox version of El Maleh Rachamim, there is a phrase that says that the encouragement of tzedakah ought to be given by the family and friends of the deceased. That particular phrase of mentioning tzedakah had been removed by the conservative and reform movements. Now, I'm not going to get into why the two Jewish denominations removed that particular reference to tzedakah in the memorial prayer, but it is retained in the Orthodox liturgy, and particularly because how do we remember our loved ones? We remember them by donating to worthy causes. That's what our Jewish tradition has always been about. It's about making sure that the legacy of our loved ones continues by contributing to causes which were important to them, so that the institutions which were important to them or organizations which were important to them in their lives are sustained. And so I don't think we emphasize enough the importance of making tzedakah contributions. That's why I always would ask the family when we prepare a Baruch Dayan Emet notice, where would you like contributions to be designated? Because we will put that at the end of the notice to the congregation, allowing people to make contributions.
this is a really good plug for not only both May 2nd, but on May 9th, we'll be having Wills Estates and social services, including Life and Legacy. And so you can think about what institutions and places and tzedakah that you're passionate about, including Mosaic Law and the Life and Legacy program. Psalm 23, by the way, just as a reminder, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. A lot of us are familiar with that. And one of the three melodies that I know, I wrote one, and I don't think anyone here has actually heard it, but and then there's a traditional Hasidic one, and then one that is my favorite, written by my composition professor at JTS. I'll just sing very lightly 2 bars of this. Adonai pravi lo exai pinoteshe yarbitzeni. And some of you might find that familiar. With that, Rabbi, if you could please talk to the transition after El Maleh and after the mourner's Kaddish, which we say after El Maleh.
At the cemetery, at graveside.
So
after, our tradition is after the El Maleh Rachamim is recited, first of all, it's recited after the casket is completely covered with earth. In order to have a kosher burial, the entire wood of the casket should be completely covered. The fact that some people and families want the entire grave to be covered before the Kaddish is recited. The Kaddish is usually recited after the El Maleh, although in some funerals the Kaddish is recited earlier in the service. Sometimes in the Reform tradition, the Kaddish will be recited not at the end, but towards the middle of a graveside service. But we normally, in our tradition, at least here in our synagogue, recite the Kaddish after the burial has been completed, which means if we're going to place Geniza books, which I think were referred to, books that are in disrepair, cannot be repaired. They're old books that have God's name in them, holy books. Rather than throw them out, we always offer the family, especially if it's a family that was a devoted Shabbat observer here at our synagogue, if they would like holy books to be buried on top of the casket with their loved one. Those books are usually placed on top of the casket before the first shovels full of earth are placed on the casket. So the Kaddish is recited after the memorial prayer is recited. And then we have the traditional prayer of condolence, where traditionally, if weather is permitting, all the friends and community members make two parallel lines from the grave, allowing the family who are in mourning to walk amongst the mourners, and everyone recites the prayer, Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch She'ara B'Leitzion B'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you, may God give you strength, as God comforts all those who mourn for Zion and Jerusalem. And then the family immediately returns home. And the first thing, Steve, if you could hand me that large box right here, Steve, right here. And the family returns home, and I really enjoyed also all the presentations that were given earlier, and Edna referred to the meal of condolence. When the family returns home to the meal of condolence, the first thing they do is the mortuary will give each immediate family member a 7-day memorial candle. And this is what it looks like. Usually has a Magen David, Star of David on it, and they light the candle, and they can recite a prayer. Cody, if you can show the prayer for the Shiva candle, which we try to give to family members. I think it's towards the end of the PowerPoint presentation. There it is. And by the way, that's Jonathan Lightman's
Oh, wow.
outstanding graphic ability. But if you look at the candle, which flickers, this is the text of the prayer that the family can recite as soon as they get home, before they actually partake in the meal of condolence. I'm not going to take the time to read this right now. The one right after this, or right before it, Cody, are you there? Thank you. Sorry to make you run. I also wanted to share this. This is a prayer by Rabbi Harold Schulweis, one of my teachers years ago at the University of Judaism, which is now called the American Jewish University. He wrote this beautiful, beautiful poem about Kriya, about the tearing and rending of the garments. And by the way, if any of you would like the entire contents of this PowerPoint, which has the Kriya prayer that Rabbi Schulweis composed, and also the prayer for lighting the Shiva candle, and all the other information, Cantor Ben would be happy to send you the PowerPoint if you email him.
We so appreciate you being here. And in about 2 minutes or 3 minutes, we'll do a question and answer session. We were jam-packed with all sorts of great information and guest speakers. It is a true dream to be able to work with all of you.
Want me to do quickly Shloshim and
yeah, standing
and
on one
Shiva,
foot, as Hillel says.
Okay, so Cody, go back to Shiva. So you all know Shiva means 7. It's the most intense period of mourning, and Shiva begins on the day of burial. And so some people decide to have a Shiva minyan or minyanim in their home, and there is a tradition not to leave your home during the 7 days of Shiva, except on Shabbat to come to the synagogue. So you don't come to the synagogue except on Shabbat. If, for whatever reason, a family or family members don't want to have a Shiva minyan, they certainly can come to our 5:45 daily service, even during Shiva, to say Kaddish, and come also in the mornings when we have morning minyanim if they desire. It's so interesting that you're not allowed to leave the house during Shiva. When my mother died, or my father died in 1993, I remember we were in my mother's small apartment in Netanya overlooking the Mediterranean, about a 6-7 minute walk to the beach of the sea. And we're sitting Shiva and we're having services morning and evening, 7 o'clock in the morning, people would come from the community. We would have breakfast, and then we would sit literally on the floor. Some people might remember the short Shiva stools. Mortuaries used to, at least on the East Coast, provide short little stools. They're uncomfortable. Why are they uncomfortable? Because during Shiva, we're not supposed to recline like at the Seder on a triclinium, on a dining couch, right? We're supposed to be uncomfortable. And we are uncomfortable. And so some people, like my brother and sister and I, when we sat Shiva, sat literally on the floor against the wall in my parents' apartment at both times after their deaths. But I will tell you, you can go stir crazy. And I remember one early morning, I decided I'm leaving the Shiva house early in the morning around 6:15 before the 7 o'clock minyan, just to take a walk on the beach and get some fresh air. And of course, one of my deceased mother's, or it was my father, my father had died. My deceased father and mother's friends were walking on the beach with a friend, and they looked at me, and they know the tradition, and they said, Rabbi, everyone called me Rabbi growing up, Rabbi, we won't tell anyone that you left the Shiva house. All right? That was before I had a dog. There you go. Must be some Jewish exception. If you have a dog, you're allowed to leave the Shiva house. Okay. Yeah. So Shiva and Shabbat is not considered to be, you don't observe Shiva on Shabbat. You take the ribbon, or you don't wear the rended garment on Shabbat. You take it off and you put it on after Shabbat. So if the burial is on a Monday, Shiva, the next Shabbat would be counted as a day of Shiva, but you don't observe it. You come to shul to say Kaddish, and then Shiva would end on Sunday if the burial were on the previous Monday, and it ends when you wake up. You take a walk around the block as a symbol of resuming your life again, and then you remove the rended garment or the ribbon. We then come to Shloshim, which is 30 days. In Israel, the unveiling is held on the 30th day. Every unveiling in Israel, every death in Israel is marked by the Shloshim. 30 days are counted from the day of burial. The Yortzeit is counted from the day of death, 12 months. We say Kaddish for a parent for 11 months. And for all other immediate family members, we say Kaddish for 30 days. Doesn't mean you can't say Kaddish longer than 30 days for a loved one. But for a parent, the rabbis taught us that they are the ones who brought us into the world, who raised us. Therefore, our obligation to say the mourner's Kaddish must be a much longer period of time to honor their memory. Okay. And then we have Yizkor 4 times a year. I don't know if you have the Yizkor. It's on Yom Kippur. Started out on Yom Kippur. It was added to Shmini Atzeret, the last days of Sukkot, the 8th day of Pesach, and the first or the second day of Shavuot. So 4 times a year, Yizkor is mentioned, is recited, where special memorial prayers are held in the synagogue. And this is a memorial candle, which you can buy usually in any grocery store. It's good to stock up on them, which we like to do, so you don't run out, because you want to make sure you light the Yizkor candle for your loved ones on the eve of the Yizkor observance. And also, these can also be used as Yortzeit candles as well. These last for approximately 24 hours. I think that covers
Rabbi,
pretty
thank you so much for
much,
coming back early
Oh, please.
from a being out of town, especially for
Well,
today, to be with us. It's a pleasure
honor
as
to be
always.
I think we need to go to Q&A, otherwise,
Yeah.
you know.
So thank you all who participated.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And Steve Polansky, thank you so much for all your organization today. And here's a mic.
All right. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, everybody who's participated in this really incredible program. And I'd like to mention the names again. Certainly, Rabbi Herman, halfway in the middle of the night from the East Coast. David Varshawsky, Carla Porter, Judy Lawson, Linda Reitzenstein, Edna Stewart, and Lou Rosenberg, and of course Rabbi Taff and Cantor Ben. It really was a wonderful program. So I have a bunch of questions, and if somebody can pass around, where's the extra mic? Okay, thank you, Joanne. If you could try, since we're kind of tight on time, we have about less than 15 minutes for questions. If you can try to keep it short. And one word that I'd like to throw in before we go to questions, and that is, right now the new synagogue policy is that on Wednesday afternoon minyan and Sunday morning minyan, in order to have the minyan, and Cantor, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to have 6 people in physical attendance, okay? That's kind of our hybrid. And this was discussed and I believe voted on with the approval of Rabbi Moses and the synagogue board. So I urge you to consider Wednesday afternoon minyan and Sunday morning minyan to try to show up in person so that we don't have a situation where we cannot do the minyan and where someone cannot say Kaddish. Okay, I have a question for Rabbi Taff. Always confused me personally is that we get a notice from the synagogue about when our loved one's yortzeit is, but not the celebration, but the recognition of it at Saturday services is can be a totally different date. Do we stand up and say Kaddish on the day, even for Saturday services, even though it's not the actual day?
So the custom, okay, the custom is, thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
The custom is to observe the yortzeit on the actual Hebrew date of the yortzeit. Now, I know in some Reform congregations, they will some congregations choose the English, the secular date according to the Gregorian calendar, rather than the Hebrew calendar. But in our tradition, it's always observed on the Hebrew date. So the tradition has been on the Shabbat before the yortzeit, that the yortzeits are announced on Friday evening and on Shabbat morning. So the custom has been to come to shul on Shabbat, and then after the yortzeits are announced, your loved one's name is read from the bima. You are certainly welcome to recite the Kaddish. You're not obligated to, but you are welcome to do that. If you also come on that particular Shabbat, you're entitled to an aliyah to the Torah in observance of your loved one's yortzeit.
And since you're standing, Rabbi, one other question, Jewish view of cremation.
I wrote an article years ago. It's probably in the archives of the Scroll, and it was an article about the Jewish view of cremation, and I'll summarize it by saying that the Jewish tradition is not to cremate. And in my article, I not only went through the entire reasoning that we're not allowed to desecrate the body, even after we're gone, because, you know, this is a God-given gift to us, our body. We're not allowed to desecrate it. But I also went through the details of what happens during a cremation, and especially after the Holocaust. after so many millions of Jews were exterminated in the crematoria, it is an abhorrent thought that Jews would choose cremation. However, in the case of a family or a family member that wishes to be cremated and the family members do not want to not go along with the wishes of their loved ones, which, by the way, our Jewish halacha says you're allowed to disregard your family's wishes if they are going to violate Jewish law in a decision they're going to be making about their body after they die. But what I want to say is that our tradition also is not to officiate at a cremation service. However, we at Mosaic Law, the clergy, have officiated at Shiva Minyanim in the home of a deceased member of our congregation or member of the family who chose cremation. So we try to be as inclusive as we can and supportive of the family members.
What about the vault?
You mean the crypt? Well, good question. Embalming is a requirement at Home of Peace Cemetery. The civil authorities require embalming. We know from ancient times that embalming was common, right? But not embalming, burying in a mausoleum or a crypt was common. I can't speak for embalming back then. What is embalming? Embalming essentially is removing the lifeblood. Even though the life of the individual is gone, that blood is removed and a chemical is injected instead. And what happens so that the person appears lifelike. So I would say this, that we frown upon encryptments. However, towards the middle of my career here, I began to officiate at those services as long as a tahara was performed for the deceased.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. And could you pass the mic to Carla? Carla, 2 questions for you. One is, who can sign the release? Any family member? And the second question was, if the body is transported, so there is some time delay, does the body have to be embalmed or not?
The first question depends on who signs the release, is who the hospital has as the next of kin. So it would be whoever is making the arrangements with the hospital. And no, the body does not have to be embalmed. If there is a delay, refrigeration will preserve the body.
Okay, thank you, Carla. And for Lou Rosenberg, you mentioned that we have 50 years worth of spots remaining. So somebody asked, what happens in year 51?
We have to find a new place.
Okay, is that something that is
the board is aware of it, and they're trying to work on it. It's kind of a long-term project, you know. Unfortunately, we would have liked to have gotten the property next to us, but it just didn't work out.
By the way, Denny had a question about clarification from Rabbi. Am I correct that the embalming only happens when there's a crypt, right?
Correct.
Correct. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, although I know that in some communities they will embalm the body, even if that individual is being buried in a grave. So I think it depends on the particular community.
Okay. And this may really has been kind of commented on before. Actually, for Lou again, just to reiterate about prepaying or purchasing a plot beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I really recommend that because of how difficult it is if you have no plans, which unfortunately happens to people. All of a sudden somebody drops and they just have to start right there and say, okay, I have to go to the funeral home, I have to go to the cemetery, I have to make all these arrangements, their head's in a whirl. So I really recommend that you do make pre-planning, and we make it as easy as possible. Because it's just, if you haven't any plans, it's really difficult, real hard.
Absolutely.
So.
For Rabbi the Cantor, Linda Reitzenstein, or anyone else, and this was mentioned before, but is there a, quote, religious reason for Shomrim?
The religious reason is, I think, what Linda stated, kibud hamet. In honor of the deceased, we don't allow the body to remain alone. And so that is a religious reason that we do guard the body. Also, we should mention that the Shomrim in our congregation are not paid. Some mortuaries will pay Shomrim in some communities an hourly rate. Larger communities like Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, but in our community, the Shomrim who go and sit outside the room where the body is, for 3 to 6 or 7 hour shifts, do it out of chesed, out of loving kindness. And I also encourage Shomrim as much as we can accommodate. Sometimes on a long weekend, especially, I think Carla mentioned how difficult, or David mentioned sometimes how difficult it is to get a burial permit quickly in Sacramento with all the steps that have to be taken. And so sometimes it can be a tircha l'tzibur, it can be a real difficult situation for our community to be able to provide shomrim for 4 or 5 days. That's why we try to emphasize a burial as quickly as possible, and also so that the remains, the deceased, is not sitting, in a mortuary for a lengthy period of time.
Thank you, Rabbi. David, did you want to add something?
Yes, I have two. One for Lou. You didn't mention the fact that you are also, I'm using my words, the piggyback routine, where you're bearing two, hypothetically the husband and the wife, up and down. Is that becoming more common or popular these days? Double, yes.
I had one the other day, but that's the first one I've had in 6 months. So we really, it's not becoming that common.
It isn't.
We do it, but if people want it, but it's not every day or an everyday occurrence.
But is there a dollar difference as well?
It's a little less expensive if
Yes.
you do a double depth.
That's correct,
Sure.
right, yeah,
So you save a little money by doing a double depth.
yeah.
Also, I was going to say, Steve, we cannot do a burial until we get the burial permit.
That's correct.
So if that's hung up, they could stop a burial.
That's what's happened in our past,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Having promised, we're kind of running over time here. One quick question, Melanie? Go ahead. Here you go.
What is the thought on organ donation?
That's going to be the next session. So actually, Rabbi Herman is going to be next Monday. So tune in next week. Next week is going to be Lionel Moses talking about Jewish laws concerning end of life. Rabbi Herman will be talking about the Vidui. Dr. Mark Blum, who's a very good friend of mine, will be talking about end of life care and advanced directives, also hospice and palliative care. He's an expert on it, and he's a former medical director of Bristol Hospice. And then again, Rabbi Herman will be talking about organ donation.
One more question.
Michael?
For the rabbi, it's a bit confusing, the prayer that refers to ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I understand.
About cremation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one. And two, what is the relevance or the handling of someone with a tattoo, and is that defacing God's image as well?
Yeah, first of all, there was I mean, it's interesting because my 10th grade confirmation class, I have one session about tattoos, where I talk about the Jewish view of tattoos, which is considered to be defiling the body. The Torah is specific about that prohibition. However, there is a myth that says if you have a tattoo, there was a common belief that if you have a tattoo, you are buried in a special section of the cemetery outside the main section of the Jewish cemetery. But that's a myth. I mean, how do you tell a Holocaust survivor that they can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery when they have numbers tattooed, on their arm? So that's a myth. I mean, it's, we frown upon it because it's considered a desecration of the human body, although people who are getting tattoos today look at it as an expression of, what's the word, huh? I'm not going to say the word meshuggah. Look, I make no judgments, okay? I make no judgments. So, but they can certainly be buried in a Jewish cemetery. As far as the verse from the book of Genesis that refers to, from dust to dust, when the proper when the normal process of decomposition of a body, it essentially it's essentially going from the full body to becoming dust. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with cremation, but it's the actual process of what happens over a period of a long time, that essentially the body just becomes bones. Okay, hope that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah. One other question, I'm sorry. Somebody said about the whole business of encryptment, that was confusing embalming only for encryptment, or everyone required to have embalming in Sacramento?
Yeah, okay. So the requirement to be placed in to be interred in a mausoleum in Sacramento County, and Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the body must be embalmed. And what if it's an outdoor mausoleum? So that's interesting because I'm pretty sure those who are buried outside of Home of Peace in the mausoleum, I'm pretty sure they were also embalmed.
It depends on the cemetery. I
So
just,
it
I
depends.
just did one at St. Mary's where it was an outside mausoleum and they did not require embalming.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I apparently also missed a question from Edna Stewart, who I was hoping would be typing this right now. Can we unmute Edna for 1 second? Edna, I hope this needs to be a quickie. We're going to unmute you. Yeah, we just need to unmute her. There we go.
Yeah, thank you. Very quick. I just want to know if you charge, if the synagogue does the tahara, do you still charge the family for it?
The synagogue, the tahara has never ever been done, at least in my time here, by our congregation. It has been always done by the community-wide Chevra Kadisha, which has its own leadership board. And so that board, I believe, decided that they ask for a contribution to the Chevra Kadisha, and if the family cannot afford it, they certainly would waive it. But that's my understanding. But Edna, are you suggesting that maybe there should not be a charge? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well,
I should say a donation?
I think that we always, because whoever does the tahara is anonymous, you can't directly go to the family and ask for a donation. But after the mate or meta is buried, after all of that and the funeral's done and Shiva is done, it can be the executive director of the shul or the rabbi might suggest a donation to the Chevra Kadisha, but that's when it's a synagogue-based Chevra Kadisha. Community Chevra Kadisha would probably like a donation as well for tachrichim and candles and stuff. But it's but the way it was presented tonight, that it's a charge, flat charge, $200, and I bet you get more if you don't designate that.
I think the process, and I might be wrong, but from what I gathered in researching for today, was that you didn't go directly to the Chevra Kadisha or the synagogue, but working with the two mortuaries, and you say that's a Jewish funeral, they'll raise a flag and they'll contact the Chevra Kadisha for you. Is that correct?
Okay. And also, I want to mention one other thing as a last thought, that there is a very wonderful person who has created a fund to be able to bury people in the Jewish tradition who have no resources and no family. So if that comes up, and it did come up fairly recently, there are those funds that are available. And I will speak to that person this week to find out whether he or she is willing to let me state who they are, because it's a wonderful mitzvah. Anyway, I encourage all of you to be here in person or in Zoom next week, and of course the week after, to continue these discussions. And I really appreciate, for those of you who came tonight, this apparently, according to Talia, who is an incredible person, and what an incredible resource. According to Talia, this is the first regular live event that we've had in the last 2 years. And so it's really wonderful. And I'm looking at our very generous donor, Hi Cashenberg, who had supplied all the food. And I encourage anybody who has listened to this program, it's obviously for free, but if you want to make a donation, write a check to Mosaic Law, and they are already alerted that the funds will be split between KOH and Mosaic Law. So good night, thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dave.